That and quickly, but don't you believe there's the argument that Donald Trump now has a foil in Nancy Pelosi, that he has someone in the House of Representatives that he can fight with, and he likes nothing more?
Oh, I think he'll like that. But this is conventional thinking. You know, conventional thinking says it's the speeches, it's the debates, it's the ads, it's the adversarial conflicts that decide a presidential election. The keys to the White House prove that is absolutely false. It is the big picture that decides presidential elections. Midterm election results, scandal, the state of the economy, foreign policy, all the things that the keys gauge. The keys also suggest that the Democrats would be making a monumental mistake by picking in 2020 a so-called safe establishment electable candidate like Joe Biden. They did that with Walter Mondale, Michael Dukakis, Al Gore, John Kerry, Hillary Clinton. And what do all those candidates have in common? Every single one of them lost. There is a charisma key for the challengers. No old party Warhouse is going to win it. The Democrats need someone new,
Jordan here,
like
just
Beto
with a quick
O'Rourke.
question. To pick up on something that you were saying that Democrats shouldn't try to pick a more centrist candidate in 2020. Yet tonight, you look at a lot of the losses, and all of the so-called progressive candidates pretty much lost.
That's not what I said. What I said was they shouldn't pick an establishment candidate, a so-called electable candidate. I said nothing about ideology. What they need is a Barack Obama in 2008, a Bill Clinton in 1992, an exciting new face who is capable of galvanizing the electorate. That's another key. It's called the challenger charisma key. It's the only key under the control of the challenging party. And let's not, if you're a Democrat, make the mistake of deciding who you think is electable and picking, again, a Dukakis, a Kerry, a Gore, a Clinton.
Alan, I've got to jump. I love the keys to the White House. I got to jump in for 1 second here because we now have a call to make at 3:32 in the morning in the Wisconsin governor's race. Tony Evers has done it. He is the apparent winner in that governor's race, defeating Scott Walker, who has won twice and another time when he held off the recall election. Scott Walker goes down in the state of Wisconsin to Tony Evers. Your reaction?
This is a solace for Democrats in governor's races after Gillum and what looks like Abrams. So big pickup for Democrats here.
Should we be surprised by that result? It was tight, we knew going in, but did you feel like Walker was going to pull it out?
I always put a thumb on the scale for Evers in that contest. And you know what? These governor's races are going to be hugely important for the next round of redistricting.
And this is an indication of the long game of grassroots organizers. We forget all of the unions and folks who came out just a couple of election cycles ago against Scott Walker. And this is the kind of culmination of that momentum on the ground. This is huge that we're seeing the back of his head. This is huge.
Noah Rothman, Scott Walker has been sort of tap dancing through the state of Wisconsin, just barely surviving several times over the years. He ran out of luck tonight.
Yeah, and it's probably not much of a surprise, but it's still devastating from the conservative perspective, given how successful he has been in governing as a conservative in a state that is otherwise previously rather hostile towards conservative governance. I wanted to briefly touch on something Dave said, because that is, to me, the big takeaway of the night. Republican gains over the course of Barack Obama's presidency were so substantial and so important to them as a party because they focused very much on the state level, on legislative level, on the gubernatorial level. We saw some Democratic gains on the legislative level, some chambers in New Hampshire, for example, and Minnesota, in New Mexico, but we haven't seen really the kind of dramatic gains that we saw in 2010, 2012, even in 2014. And with the loss of governors in places, or Democratic challengers in places like Florida, Ohio, and Iowa, it suggests that, you know, heading into 2020, and especially for decennial reapportionment in 2021, that Democrats are not going to be enjoying the kind of gains that Republicans made in such a short period of time under Barack Obama.
And we can now add Tony Evers, the Democrat in Wisconsin, to the list of Democratic pickups tonight in governor's mansions across the country. Add to the list Illinois, Kansas, New Mexico, Michigan. Republicans tonight are celebrating wins in the state of Florida, in Ohio, and perhaps we may learn tomorrow in the state of Georgia. Much more ahead when we come back. We're watching the midterm elections live in late night here on MSNBC. Welcome back to MSNBC's coverage of Election Day, or I guess the day after Election Day officially now, because on the West Coast it's 12:39. It is 3:39 in the morning where we're sitting in our studio here at Rockefeller Plaza in New York City. Thanks for staying up with us. Our coverage of a major midterm flip continues right now. I am Willie Geist. We already know Democrats will take control of the House of Representatives. We're still waiting on results from some late races before we know by just how much. The Democrats already passed the minimum net gain of 23 to lock up the majority, now trying to run that up. Republicans, meanwhile, still in control of the Senate. A few late races still too close to call will determine the margin of victory. Looking right there at the Arizona Senate race, Martha McSally, the Republican, Kirsten Sinema, too close to call. The split there, about 22,000 votes. In the state of Florida, back here on the East Coast, 38,000 votes or so separate Governor Rick Scott, the Republican, and the incumbent Democrat Bill Nelson. We're still waiting to call that one. In Montana, 2,425 votes between the incumbent Democrat John Tester and the Republican Rosendale in the state of Montana. Just within the last hour, we've been able to project that Jackie Rosen, the Democrat, will be the next senator from the state of Nevada come January, knocking off the Republican incumbent Dean Heller there. In the Nevada's governor's race, Steve Sisolak, a Democratic gain, a pickup there, another in the Democrat category in the governor's mansions as well. We have two late calls in Nevada that we can make there. As I said, the NBC decision desk projecting Democrat Jackie Rosen unseating Dean Heller. She's already made her speech. Dean Heller, the Republican, has already conceded there. So let's bring back in. Do we have Kornacki over there? We don't have Kornacki at the board. You hate when Kornacki disappears because he hasn't left the board, so we worry about him when he's not there. He hasn't left for about 24 hours. But joining our conversation, Maria Teresa Kumar, president of Voto Latino and an MSNBC contributor. Susan Del Percio, Republican strategist and an MSNBC political analyst. Also with us, Elise Jordan, and joining us, Adrian Elrod, former director of strategic communications for Hillary Clinton's 2016 campaign. And down at the end of the table, Dave Wasserman. Good morning. Welcome to you all.
Good morning. Good morning.
Okay, good morning. Okay, we've agreed. We've agreed it's morning now.
It is morning.
Maria, let's talk about the kind of candidate that won tonight. We were talking in the break about a young candidate. We were talking about women. We were talking about historic firsts as well.
Well, for the very first time, we're about to vote in 100 women in Congress all in one time. 22 women are new. They've never been part of Congress. We're going to be sending in the first 2 Muslim American women into Congress, the first Native American woman. 600 millennials ran for office, mostly Democrats. And that means that all of a sudden the Democrats are actually refreshing a bench. And that should be a lot of excitement, because we're not only talking about, yes, Congress, but we're talking about filling state houses. That's a big deal when it comes to redistricting that is going to be on the horizon in 2020.
So if you're a Republican, and you are, Susan,
I am.
And you're looking at what happened tonight, the loss of the House and all that means for President Trump, and the pushback that Jerry Nadler, who will lead the Judiciary Committee, has already said he's going to apply on the President of the United States. How are you feeling today? You picked up some seats in the Senate. You picked up some governor's mansions. How are you feeling?
If you're Donald Trump, you're really scared. Or at least very concerned, because you will have to deal with Nancy Pelosi and a lot of new chairs, especially when it comes to the Intel Committee, too. We're going to see changes. Nunes is out. His protector-in-chief is out. So that's going to be problematic. But just one thing I also think is, if you look at tonight's results and you're Donald Trump looking towards 2020, what really has to concern you is he wrung out every vote he could for Republicans. Republicans had no growth. And just based on what we heard just now, Democrats are growing with millennials. They're growing with Hispanic. Everywhere. There's a lot of prospecting for Democrats to go to. Republicans have none. And that's the most concerning thing, I think, at this point, if you're looking towards 2020.
I'd also add to the list of new faces veterans. A number of veterans winning tonight. Max Rose over in Staten Island.
And many of them who ran as Democrats,
That's
not
right.
as Republicans.
Max Rose,
and
Democrat.
1 out of 6 voters that came out to vote were new voters. And most of them were Democrats.
Yeah.
Adrienne, what about from your perspective? Susan Del Percio gives us the point of view of the Republican and what Donald Trump might be feeling tonight. What about from where you're sitting as a Democrat? How does it feel?
You know, it feels great. I was actually working at the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee in 2006 when Democrats flipped the House, so that was a very exciting evening, and this feels almost the same. As Maria Teresa Kumar pointed out, Democrats have a major advantage demographically. More women are voting for Democrats. More millennials are voting for Democrats. We're expanding our base. We're expanding the map. And we're also expanding our bench for the future. We are building a new generation of elected officials who will help lead the party for generations to come. And I think that's another thing that we can't look over tonight.
Alexi McCammon's still with us from Washington, D.C. Alexi, oh, she's not here. Okay, I made that up. Maybe some wishful thinking. Maybe she'll join us in our next segment. Let's talk about, though, the makeup of Congress now, Dave, and what it means for the President of the United States. We've talked about Jerry Nadler at Judiciary. Nancy Pelosi obviously gets the gavel back. Adam Schiff, who's been pining to run the Intel Committee and now gets that chance, has already been on our air on MSNBC tonight talking about his plans to protect Bob Mueller and his investigation. This is a completely different dynamic in Washington.
Yeah, and the margin of the majority for Democrats has always mattered as much as the majority for purposes of determining who the speaker will be and the direction of the party in the House. And there were 37 Democrats who were on the DCCC's list of endorsees who pledged that they would not vote for Nancy Pelosi for Speaker. Now, we're still tallying up how many of those Democrats are headed to Congress. But if Democrats only have a majority of 10 or 12 seats, then it's possible Nancy Pelosi won't have 218 votes to become Speaker. She has held the line in some respects against this, drive of the base to impeach the president, but the Democrats could come under heavy pressure from their base over the coming 2 years to go to more drastic measures.
That's such an interesting point. We haven't heard the word impeachment yet. Over the first couple of hours we've been on the air, Elise. Nancy Pelosi has been very careful to stay away from that word, but there is a wing, as Dave says, of the Democratic Party who says the reason we want the House back is to get rid of Donald Trump through impeachment.
Well, and politically, that was a smart move on Nancy Pelosi's behalf, because that just really riles up the Republican base. Right. And also Democrats who are frustrated with Congress not getting anything done. It doesn't necessarily appeal to them, the idea of starting impeachment proceedings. And so that was the right instinct on her part. Whether other Democrats are going to be able to show similar restraint now that they're in power remains to be seen.
But she did also throw something out there. She did say tonight, or through people with her approval, that they will get Donald Trump's taxes.
Right.
So that was kind of just sweetening the pot to say, look, I'm willing to go aggressive to those 37 new members who may challenge her. But that was a little sweetener for them to say, we're going to go on offense.
But I think what we're going to see right now is the president is going to try to stress test the system, see how far he could actually push it. And what we may have, if Nancy
he can't push it any further.
No, but he can. And I think that is the challenge, is that I think that the Democrats really have to walk this plank very carefully, because if immediately they start saying impeachment, then all of a sudden he starts winning in a very big way. And we could actually be in a constitutional crisis. So my recommendation would be for them to literally just start investigating all their cabinet members one by one, because every single one of them has their hand in the cookie jar, and that allows the president to continue his path, but he doesn't have any power.
And it's worth pointing out, impeachment goes nowhere with the Senate.
Exactly.
Now, you've actually added a couple of Republican seats. Alan Lichtman, is it too much to think? Let's imagine a scenario now where Donald Trump, the President of the United States, has Nancy Pelosi to deal with as the Speaker of the House, and things start to get done? Or are we just in for more gridlock here? Because Donald Trump likes to portray himself as a deal maker, the kind of person who wants to get in a room with somebody and cut a deal. Is there hope that some of that may now happen?
Absolutely. Look, one thing you got to understand about Donald Trump is the man has no ideology and no principles. What Donald Trump cares about is Donald Trump. And what Donald Trump thrives on, aside from controversy and division, is wins. And as long as he can get a win, he doesn't really care how he gets it or what the ideological makeup of that win might be. If it means dealing with the devil, Nancy Pelosi, then deal with the devil. And he could possibly deal with the devil on infrastructure, on prison reform, and maybe even go back to that compromise on immigration reform that he rejected several months ago. Absolutely do not underestimate the fact that Donald Trump can turn on a dime. He can turn in an hour, in a day, in a week. Don't presume he's going to stand by principle.
And Nancy Pelosi was asked today about how she might work with Donald Trump. She said infrastructure. That seems to always be the place we start with infrastructure, something we can agree needs a lot of work. A lot more to come here on MSNBC. We are live right through the night, and we'll talk about some of the key issues that drove voters in record numbers to the polls tonight. We're coming right back live on MSNBC. Welcome back to MSNBC's live coverage of election night. It is 3:52 in the morning here in New York City, 12:52 out west. Jonathan Lemire of the Associated Press joins us now, adding him to our table of contributors who've bravely stayed with me through the night. Jonathan, thanks for being here, man. You cover the White House closely. How's the White House feeling today? President Trump seems, on Twitter anyway, to be subdued a bit, just quoting other people saying nice things about him.
Right. They've been prepared for this result. For a few weeks now, they certainly weren't going to say it publicly, but the White House was expecting the House of Representatives to slip away and to end the era of one-party control in Washington. This marks a new chapter in the Trump presidency, but I think we're going to see a pretty bullish output from the president and from the West Wing in the next day or so. That's how they were signaling to us tonight in our reporting. They feel like that there were historical headwinds that they had to combat against the House, pointing that, of course, usually sitting presidents do lose a bunch of seats there. In this case, they lost control, but feeling good about keeping the Senate, picking off a few seats there. The president himself personally invested in a number of those races. They're quick to point out that in his final 2 days, he went 5 for 5 in terms of the races he went to, the states he went to. Now, of course, some of that is they picked ones they thought they could win, but he deserves some credit for carrying some of these candidates, as in Missouri or Ohio or Indiana, over the finish line. And they feel like that this is a victory for him. That the president tonight, we didn't hear much from him. One tweet that sort of signaled, a thank you and that it was a terrific result. And that I think we will see them going forward. They know that things have changed. Yeah, they know they face investigations. Their agenda will stall. But they also feel like they have a foil to run against now. And most of their agenda can proceed because they kept the Senate.
Yeah, the president yesterday was in Indiana, Missouri, and Ohio, 3 wins for Republicans in those 3 states. Jonathan, as you know better than I, impeachment is on the president's mind from time to time, and part of the case he made for people to get out and vote and to keep control of the House was that he didn't want Nancy Pelosi and others in that caucus to consider the idea of impeachment. He told his voters they want to undo your free and fair election from 2016. Are you hearing much about that word? Some Democrats staying away from it, but what's the White House take on that?
I think most in the White House actually would welcome that fight. They think impeachment's a non-starter. First of all, of course, there's no chance of the president being removed from office. The Republicans kept the Senate. They point to what happened in 1998 when Republicans did impeach Bill Clinton. It was perceived as a bit of government overreach, of political overreach, and Bill Clinton's poll numbers only continued to climb. They think that's a fight that they can win. They're more concerned about what will be an endless litany of investigations coming their way. Now that the Democrats control the House, or will as of January, and have the power of the subpoena, there will be all sorts of investigations. It won't just be Russia. It'll be looking into cabinet members' corruption, whether the president's business profited off of him being in office. And they're more concerned about that. They'll still try to paint that as the Democrats overreaching. They'll try to make Nancy Pelosi, but not just her, but the Ascendant Committee chairmen, whether it's Jerry Nadler or Elijah Cummings, sort of paint them as the bad guys, that they're trying to overstep what the voters have given them. They know that's going to be an issue. There'll be some, our reporting indicates, some measured attempts at bipartisanship, some efforts to probably try to work together, whether it's infrastructure or opioids or criminal justice reform. But they know this is a divided Washington now. Gridlock will set in even further, and there's no sense in a sort of deeply polarized city and nation, there's no sense that these divides won't only get deeper.
Could be a long 2 years.
And just to add to that, let's not forget how inexperienced this White House is. So they also had the House leading a lot of their agenda, putting it forward. They knew how to manage everything basically on behalf of the White House. Now you're going to have the Democrats in charge who know how to do investigations. The White House doesn't know how to respond to this. They are, again, it's like they're almost entering a brand new administration. They're facing such new challenges that they don't know how to handle it just from the get-go, which is going to be also very problematic.
Well, and he centralized power, so he basically has incapacitated any of his advisors or any of his cabinet members to go on his behalf to Congress. And as a result, he's going to be much more exposed and more vulnerable.
And won't have Devin Nunes sneaking in with some early leaks and early preview of what's coming down the pike. We're staying up all night here on MSNBC, and you should too.
It sounds like a threat.
Don't you dare go to bed on us now. We're coming up on 4 o'clock here on the East Coast. You've made it this far, just keep going. We're live from 30 Rockefeller Center on a big election night. We're coming right back. It is 4 a.m. That's right, 4 a.m. live here on the East Coast, 1 a.m. for our viewers out west. Thanks for staying up with us. I'm Willie Geist. It is still election night, or maybe the morning after. We haven't decided still. This morning, both parties claiming victory. The Democrats have won enough seats in the House to take the majority there. They needed a net gain of 23, which they have locked up. Our NBC News decision desk projects Democrats could end up with as many as 230 seats in the House. The Senate, meanwhile, remaining in Republican control. In fact, Republicans picked up a few seats, including some of the highest profile ones. Let's take a look at some of the results as we rip through. The highest profile of all, perhaps, Ted Cruz, the Republican incumbent, holding off the insurgent Beto O'Rourke, the Democrat, falling just short in the state of Texas. Mike Braun, an upset of Democratic incumbent Joe Donnelly in the state of Indiana. North Dakota Senate race goes another Republican gain to Kevin Kramer, who defeated Heidi Heitkamp. Marsha Blackburn in the state of Tennessee defeating Phil Bredesen, the former governor of that state. She will be the next senator there. Joe Manchin, the Democrat in a state Donald Trump won by 40 points, holds on to his seat as a Democrat in the state of West Virginia. An upset, a bit of an upset in the state of Missouri. Josh Hawley, the Republican, picking up a seat for his party there, knocking off Claire McCaskill. And Jackie Rosen, just within the last hour, we've been able to project in the state of Nevada, the Democrat defeating the Republican incumbent Dean Heller there, another Democratic pickup in the Senate. Still too close to call, though, in a couple of these tight races. Martha McSally, the Republican, with a 19,000 vote spread, just barely over Kyrsten Sinema in the state of Arizona. Again, that is too close to call with 71% of the vote in. Also, Florida, the Senate race there, still too close to call, even with 99% of the vote in. The split there between Governor Rick Scott, the Republican, and Bill Nelson, only 38,000 votes. Meanwhile, in Montana, John Tester fighting for his life, the Democratic incumbent, up 6,500 votes in the state of Montana. We'll keep a close eye on that one for you throughout the morning. And checking in with some of the governor's races we've been following. Here's what we know so far about those. A big win for the Democrats in the state of Wisconsin. Tony Evers defeating the incumbent Scott Walker. Scott Walker, who's won elections several times in that state, including in a recall election, is now out of office. And in a high-profile race in the state of Florida, the Republican Ron DeSantis defeating Andrew Gillum, one of the young hopes for the Democratic Party, falling just short in the state of Florida. Meanwhile, California has a new governor. Its lieutenant governor will move up in office. Gavin Newsom winning easily over the Republican John Cox. In Oregon, Kate Brown is the projected winner in that state against Newt Bueller, the Republican there, winning by 6 points. So our experts are up late night with us. It's now 4:04 a.m. on the East Coast. Maria Teresa Kumar is the president of Voto Latino and an MSNBC contributor contributor. Elise Jordan is an MSNBC political analyst, the co-host of the Words Matter podcast. Susan Del Percio is a Republican strategist and an MSNBC political analyst. And down at the end of the table, we pulled up a chair for him, real special like. John Meacham, the Pulitzer Prize-winning presidential biographer and historian, also an MSNBC contributor back in D.C. Jonathan Lemire is the White House reporter for the Associated Press and an MSNBC political analyst. Also with us, Adrienne Elrod, former director of strategic communications for Hillary Clinton's 2016 campaign. An outstanding, probably a better panel than I deserved at 4 o'clock in the morning. Thank you all for being here. John, you brought some dry cleaning with you.
I did.
And you've taken some notes on
research.
That's on dry cleaning cardboard.
This is from Marsha Blackburn State now.
There it is. Hey, let's start in Tennessee, the state where you live.
Yeah.
Surprised by the result and how quickly it was called?
Surprised by the margin.
Yeah.
Tennessee has a tradition, complicated state. Let's see, so it's 405, so let's talk about 1860.
There.
We were a state that was the last to secede, first to get back in, very divided historically, therefore a complicated state, and so statewide has often sent people like Howard Baker or the Gores or Jim Sasser, people who are not on an extreme side of one or the other. Senator-elect Blackburn, whether you agree or disagree with her, is very much a Fox News conservative, comes straight from that tradition, and we've sent more moderate folks in the past, and now in the culture of Trump, we've sent someone who's more sulfurous, I think is a fair way to put it.
Well, it's worth pointing out, too, as you know, John, that Phil Bredesen was a very popular governor. When he was reelected, it was with almost 70% of the vote. He was the mayor of Nashville. They picked the right kind of candidate for the state, that did Democrats.
And he ran the right kind of campaign, too.
Yeah.
He really did a beautiful political balancing act of saying that he would be separate from the National Democratic Party, that he wasn't going to just necessarily knee-jerk oppose Trump just because he was Donald Trump. And he really was on a pretty good path, I think.
He even supported Kavanaugh.
He did, but Kavanaugh was really where it all went off the rails for him. That was when I feel like Tennessee voters remembered their tribal designs a little bit more. Because I had been surprised by how much positivity there was there in the state when we were there in March doing focus groups. And strong Trump supporters went out of their way to justify why they would consider voting for Phil Bredesen, and that just never really happens. Oh, he's not that liberal. He's really, he's actually more of a moderate. Times were good when he was governor. And then you saw, though, his poll numbers just really whoosh as soon as Kavanaugh.
One of the issues is the price of prosperity to some extent. There are a lot of voters in Tennessee who have come there, a lot of voters throughout the South who have come because these governors have done a really good job of recruiting industry. People come, and people have argued for a long time, kind of at 30,000 feet, that, well, this will turn all these states purple. Bill Haslam, who's the outgoing governor of Tennessee, has a great theory, which is that actually what happens is that the people who move to these more conservative states, in a way, are able to more fully embrace what they feel politically, but if they're in a blue state, they don't want to own it. And they have permission to be more what they are when they come down. And I think that there's some of that. I also don't think there's, I know we're going to seek desperately to find lessons state by state. Bredesen, as Elise says, Bredesen is an example of running a centrist campaign. Very senior Republicans said exactly what you said early on. If you're going to recruit a candidate, this is who you recruit. But then the Florida gubernatorial result, the Texas result, so candidates who ran, and depending on what happens with Abrams in Georgia, so the progressive campaign doesn't seem to have been an automatic winner any more than the centrist one.
Well, and an argument was, though, that in Texas, Phil Bredesen probably would have succeeded against Ted Cruz because he was running an electorate that was more moderate. And so you have 40...
But I mean, Texas is an incredible upset. Cruz won his last election by close to 17 points. Yeah. Hillary lost by 9. The fact that we are talking about just even 2 percentage points, 3 percentage points, is a revolution in Texas. The fact that Pete Sessions lost his congressional seat, someone that has been an 11-time incumbent, that is a revolution. And then at the same time, all of a sudden, they elected 10 new Democratic members to the State House. All of a sudden, the electoral map in Texas, redistricting, is on the map. Beto did what he was expected to do. The fact that he came so close, that is going to be the next epicenter.
And he brought a lot of candidates along for the ride with him.
Yeah. No, but the major difference with Tennessee versus Georgia or Florida is it wasn't the party establishment candidates that were the nominees. Let's not forget. No one saw Gillum coming. I mean, he wasn't even registering in the polls. And Abrams was not what they were looking for as a candidate. But they said, give me a shot, and to their Democratic primary voters, and said, let's see what happens if we put a progressive in there. But that, I think, was much different than what we saw in Tennessee, who they really sought to put up a really good candidate via this establishment.
But I think what he was also saying is that the traditional Tennessean actually voted for Phil Bredesen. What you're seeing is a lot of new individuals that are coming in and owning Tennessee that don't espouse those political traditions, and they're the ones.
Well,
that
that's why we saw the polling, but that's also why we saw the polling go the way it went, because they couldn't account for those new voters because they just weren't expecting them to show up that much.
Now, have you talked about 1966 yet?
Well, you're jumping far. Let's pace ourselves. We've got 2 hours. All right. I thought you were going to start in 1607 with Jamestown and work your way.
Well, we do have the midterms after the Alien and Sedition Act. It was a hell of a thing.
This is why we have you here, John.
I know. Actually, if people aren't asleep now, we're going to take care of it.
We just lost the entire West Coast. Thank you, John.
But on your Texas point, 52 years ago, in the 7th District of Texas, a young guy, George Herbert Walker Bush, becomes the first Republican in that part of the world. That seat flipped to the Democrats tonight.
Right.
Adrienne, you're waiting patiently across the studio. I see you over there. Let's talk about big picture now. Let's take it up to 30,000 feet about what happened right now. We've heard from the Democratic Governors Association. They're excited. Big night, lost some. They hoped to grab at one others. They weren't sure they would. They flipped a bunch of seats. Obviously, the House falls in their hands, and all that implies for not just for the House, but for the President of the United States. What does it look like from the Democratic position?
Well, a couple of things. I think, first of all, when it comes to governing, I think that, first of all, Democrats have got to make sure that they are not just trying to hold the Trump administration accountable through subpoenas and through congressional investigations, because a lot of the progressive wing of the party wants that. But at the same time, they've got to legislate, because independents and white suburban voters in particular, who are, of course, that ultimate swing vote, they voted for Democrats in this cycle because they actually want to see something fixed on health care. They want to see bipartisan policy solutions put into place. So I think Democrats have got to make sure that they don't just, only try to hold Trump accountable and talk about impeachment. They've also got to legislate at the same time. Going into 2020, which I know we don't want to get too ahead of our skis here, but I mean, might as well, right? The polls are closed.
Go ahead.
Look, I think I want to touch on something that Maria Teresa Kumar said about people like Beto O'Rourke. I mean, the fact that Texas came this close bodes very well for Texas in 2020. I mean, we've got a couple states, Arizona, Texas, that are ripe for the picking for Democrats in 2020. The map has been expanded. Democrats have done a great job of bringing more voters into the fold, and I think that will be something that trends more positively for Democrats going forward.
We'll see what happens in Georgia if we get the ultimate result, but the 3 so-called rock stars of the Democratic Party, Andrew Gillum, Beto O'Rourke, and Stacey Abrams, they lost, but by small margins.
Well, they lost, but now the Democrats actually have a base that more reflects this new generation of a progressive movement. But I do want to highlight the fact that even though the Democrats did so well, it doesn't mean that they're doing well in preparing the bench for, the Electoral College for the 2020 elections. And what I mean by that is that while we may have gone ahead and flipped the House, we didn't win in the deep rural areas. And the way the electoral map is done, those still favor the White House right now. And I think that's going to be the challenge, is that while we're doing well in the House, are we actually setting up to win the White House?
Well, as the results rolled in,
we're already talking about
speaking of the White House, the president declared the midterms a success. More on his influence and the new Congress he will have to try to work with to some extent when our special election coverage continues with more arcane historical references from John Meacham at 4:14 in the morning. We'll be right back.
Victory speech on the evening of Election Day, which is coming up very quickly. A vote for Morrissey is a vote for me. A vote for Marsha is really a vote for me. I'm not on the ballot, but in a certain way, I'm on the ballot, so please go out and vote. And a vote for Cindy is a vote for me. And a vote for Steve is a vote for me. Remember this, a vote for David is a vote for me in our agenda to make America great again.
President Trump made it clear, as you heard there, the midterm elections were about him. During the closing weeks of the midterm campaign cycle, he hit the road hard to spread that message. In the last 6 days of the campaign, President Trump held 11 rallies across 8 battleground states. Since he took office, the president has held 53 rallies in 23 states, including 30 since Labor Day. Leanne Caldwell is an NBC News Capitol Hill reporter. She joins us now from Washington. Leanne, so let's talk about some of your reporting, but also let's talk about the president and his rallies. Just in the last few days, if you go down, he was in the state of Tennessee, Marsha Blackburn won. You go into the state of Indiana, Braun won. You go into the state of Missouri, Hawley won. The state of Ohio, Mike DeWine is the new governor of that state. So he is, and the White House is, claiming some measure of victory tonight.
That's right, and they should. It ended up being a very tribal election. Red state Democrats did not do well tonight. One of the things that was really fascinating for me is the Tennessee race. Phil Bredesen, he only won a few counties there. The last time he ran for governor, he won every single county in that state. So there's a major discrepancy and difference between his last run for governor and the election results tonight. As far as where Trump is going to work with Congress, still waits to be seen. Both sides are talking about infrastructure. They always say that transportation and infrastructure used to be a bipartisan thing, and they put out the challenge to see if it will be bipartisan again. But there's a couple models out here with this divided government. You go back to 1994, and Newt Gingrich worked closely with Bill Clinton to pass some major bills, including welfare reform. But in 2010, when Republicans took back the House with Obama in control in the presidency, Republicans did not do hardly anything to work with Obama. They tried to stifle him every step of the way. It'll be really interesting to see how serious Democrats and the administration are in trying to get anything done, especially as all these investigations are going to be opened, and if Trump is willing to work with Democrats simultaneously while he's being investigated on a daily basis, really.
Yeah, Susan, do you have any reason to believe that the president is suddenly going to snap to and be into some bipartisanship, especially when they're trying to get his tax returns and they're coming at him with everything they have?
Not even that much.
Not even a little bit, right.
No, but and what there is something to say that the president always puts himself first. So if he does see any way of this working to his benefit, he will do it. But I think he likes having issues like, I don't think he wants to solve immigration. I think he wants to use it as an issue. He wants to say that we're not having infrastructure because I can't work with the Democrats. So I think he'd rather have them as issues to campaign on, because we've now heard he's going back on the campaign trail, like soon. He likes these rallies. He's going to keep doing them. So he needs that foil. I think he'll like that more than compromise.
Maria, do you think the caravan disappears now? I mean, it was obvious. It was obviously a tool he was using to get people out to vote tonight.
Right.
Does it go away?
I think it's going to start dissipating, and I think that it backfired on him in many ways, because even in a place like Texas and even places like Arizona, places where he actually needed much more of stronger voters to come out, they didn't, and the Midwest basically demonstrated that was neutralized, especially among suburban moms. So I think that we are going to see him pivot a little bit, but he does like the red meat, and he likes discord.
I don't know if it worked so much against him where he wanted to get voter turnout, because he was going into those red states. He was looking to get his base out. He knew he couldn't expand because he had no appeal to any other type of voter.
I don't disagree, but I think that he expected it to play much better in places like Texas and the Midwest, and it backfired. I think, if anything, it neutralized a lot of suburban moms who all they could think of was basically this idea of babies in cages. That's what kept coming to them, and the polls showed that people cared about health care,
congressional
and they cared about immigration.
Let's bring into the conversation Victoria DeFrancesco, MSNBC contributor and lecturer at the LBJ School of Public Public Affairs. Victoria, thank you so much for being up so early with us this morning. We appreciate it. Let's take up this conversation on the question of immigration and how important you believe it was tonight. Obviously, the president was banging the drum on this caravan as some imaginary threat to the border of the United States, sending troops down there, in fact, and putting out concertina wire to keep these families out of the country when they get here, if they ever do. How important do you believe immigration was? In our exit polling, 23% of voters said it was the most important issue.
Since Donald Trump descended from the escalators in Trump Tower in 2015, immigration has been at the top of his list because he knows it can mobilize that base. It is pure red meat to that base. He used it in his 2016 campaign. He's used it at different points throughout his administration, and in the last couple of weeks, he has ramped it up. In an ideal world, I would like to think that over the next 2 years, maybe with the Democratic Congress, Donald Trump, the deal maker, could find some sort of deal, but I'm going to lean here more with Susan in that I think that he needs this as a foil. He needs the Democrats to compare and contrast with his base and saying, look, we've got all of these criminals, these bad hombres, all of these immigrants coming over. You need to keep me in office past 2020. So I think immigration, even though he may make noises of finding a resolution, he needs to keep it there. And he's definitely not going to get money for the border wall with the Democratic Congress, but he's going to do anything he can to keep it on the radar screen for that base.
Well, he's got to keep it around if he wants to get reelected. He thinks it's his best vehicle. He thinks it's why he's in the White House in the first place. John, give us a little hope here, if you would, for the next 2 years. When Donald Trump was elected, I think some hoped, perhaps it was wishful thinking, that he would act as this deal maker that he portrays himself as, that he'd get in the room with Chuck and Nancy, as he likes to call them, and cut a deal. Chuck, you and me, a couple of New York guys, let's make something happen. That hasn't happened, obviously. You see any reason for that to change now with the Democratic House?
I don't, because I don't think he sees history or governing in the same incentives, with the same incentive structure that the previous 43 people who've had that job have done. You count Grover Cleveland twice, because I know you were about to make a point.
No, I was not. I knew exactly why you said it.
It's the Vanderbilt Education Network. Yeah, I like that.
Let's not go there, Sawani. Go ahead.
So there are one of the. I used to think this wouldn't possibly he was not a tragic figure, the president, because in classic Greek terms you have to have great scope to be tragic. I've changed my mind on that because he has the possibility, not the capacity, but the possibility of almost innumerable Nixon to China moments.
Yeah.
If he wanted to do immigration, he could do immigration.
Justice reform.
Right. If infrastructure, entitlement reform, there are any number of things that if you could take some of the showman energy, just part of it, and sort of funnel it, if you could take the professional wrestling energy and get a little bit of Brookings Institution, you would actually have something here. But it's all going to stay over here, I think. The hope, I think, is that this was, there's sort of a spectrum here. There's JFK and George W. Bush, who both, George W. won a couple of seats. President Kennedy only lost 3 or 4 after the missile crisis in terms of a first term, midterm. But then there's the Truman, Clinton, Obama, where you just get totally wiped out. Sort of as ever, Trump sort of defies easy categorization. He's in the middle here. It's more like 1982. It's more like 2006, which is it's a bad night, but it's not such an existential scare that it's going to scare him into the substance.
Don't those possibilities only exist because Donald Trump has no core principles? Because he's willing to maneuver anyway if he wants to and finds it
I don't want to say he has core principles, but because all the evidence is against it. But in a way, that doesn't matter, at least in the terms of the context of this conversation. The presidents we remember that we tend to want to both emulate and commemorate are the ones who have reached beyond their base for whatever reason. So.
Without selling their principles out, though. That's one of the things we look to our leaders for, is to stay true to their principles and still get things done, and that's real leadership.
No, but
Whereas
Donald Trump doesn't have
it. That's what I'm saying. He hasn't, so the possibilities, I guess, are endless in a lot of ways because he's willing to go wherever he thinks it's going to benefit him without having any.
Right, but I think what John is saying is basically it's like that a true leader is basically all of a sudden governing for the rest of the country,
right?
And unifying everything.
He doesn't think about the rest of the country.
No, but I do think that the idea that you sparked is that what will be interesting is that if this immigration turned out that it backfired bigger than he did, will he shake up his inner circle? Will he shake up Steve Miller? Will he shake up John Kelly? Are they now going to be the ones that he basically decides, you know what, you gave me the wrong advice. We're in a deeper problem than we possibly could have imagined. And do you see actually a shake-up there?
I don't think those two are going anywhere, but Jeff Sessions is going somewhere. Lindsey Graham's
Lindsey Graham.
And I think
and Lindsey Graham is like passing his resume.
Not to totally be Debbie Downer, but I think that he is going to dig in more into this strategy of political segregation, because he's going to see this as the House. He'd been primed that was probably going to fall, but the Senate, it's looking pretty good for him. And then all these major governorships.
2 weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, the New Yorker reported that John Kelly has been bringing everybody in precisely for this scenario of what would happen when they started going under investigations. But we also know that relationship with John Kelly is incredibly tenuous, and he doesn't have someone that he can go into Congress right now and represent him. So is he going to shake him up? I wouldn't be surprised if he would do that.
See, I think he continues to think of us as an audience, not as a country. And so he's used to having some people boo him. Part of the crowd's supposed to. Part of the crowd's supposed to yell for you. And I don't think there's going to be some Clark Kent moment here where he emerges as Lyndon Johnson dealmaker. I just don't think that's going to happen. I think the good news here is that this is the House in Democratic hands is a greater check on the potential extreme actions of the administration. And you hope that the message to the progressive side of the country is not that, you work really hard and you don't get it so much, but it's that you work hard and elections don't always determine everything. You have to keep pressing on.
We've got to fit in a break, mostly to cover the cost of John's exorbitant appearance fee. A commercial break now to take care of that. When we come back, another update on California House race results. Yeah, they're still coming in. And later, we'll talk about a historic wave of women going to Congress. MSNBC's special election coverage continues live now at 4:30 a.m. on the East Coast, 1:30 out west. We'll be right back on MSNBC. Welcome back to our live coverage. I'm sorry to bring this up, but the number on the lower left of your screen, countdown to the 2020 election. It's but 727 days away. Welcome back to MSNBC's live coverage. Yeah, it's live at 4:33 in the morning here in New York City. It's 1:30 a.m. out west. If you're just waking up on the East Coast, I'm sorry. If you're still up on the West Coast, good for you. You're having a big night. Stay with us for a couple more hours. The great, the legend, Mike Barnicle. He was wandering down 50th Street. We waved him upstairs, and he sat down in a chair, completely uninvited.
Wasn't it a silver alert? When you lose the elderly at Disney.
What am I doing here?
It's a roast. We invited you here for a roast.
Mr. Barnicle is that Daffy Duck.
So Mike, you've just sat down. You've been watching the results come in. I'm sure you've been up all night watching the results.
Yes.
Democrats win the House. Republicans pick up a couple seats in the Senate. Donald Trump's got to deal with Nancy Pelosi. He's got to deal with Adam Schiff. He's got to deal with Jerry Nadler. He's got to deal with Elijah Cummings. All the Democrats who now control those committees. What do the next 2 years look like in this country?
Chaos. Chaos, because I don't think Donald Trump thinks about anything that you just mentioned. I think he thinks I had a wonderful night. Me, myself, I did it. I brought several new members of the Senate into power. I think he has no regard for the fact that the House is now going to have some check on him, hopefully. Susan, we were talking off camera. You should feel a bit better about the fact that we now have a governor, so to speak, on Trump's behavior a bit. But I don't think he's thinking anything of that. I think he's so enthralled with what he thinks he did personally, and he did. He had a big night. He had a big night.
Yeah, the places we were talking about before you sat down where he was the last couple of days. Republicans won.
Yeah.
They won in the places where he held his rallies, but they did lose the House. Joining us now from Los Angeles, NBC News correspondent Cal Perry, as well as the chief strategist for the Serve America movement, Reed Galen. Reed served as deputy campaign manager for John McCain's presidential campaign and deputy campaign manager for Arnold Schwarzenegger's successful 2006 re-election campaign in California. Reed, let me begin with you. Your broad stroke thoughts about the night for Republicans.
Well, I think obviously the fact that they could have as many as a 10-seat majority in the United States Senate is obviously going to make both the president and Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell very happy. Although they've lost the House, I would assume that they're going to continue pushing through their judges and whatever it is they can do from the Senate perspective. So I think that they've got to feel pretty good about that. Just to echo something that Mike said, I think that he's absolutely right. You know, we can talk about the Democrats owning the House and having all these investigative powers. You have to assume first that the president cares, and I'm not entirely sure that he does. He has shown that he is willing to issue executive orders, even if he knows they have no basis in law, statutory or otherwise. And so I think as we move forward, we have to get out of what I think we're probably all guilty of, is this conventional thinking that the president's just going to start to fall into line because now someone else is in charge of the United States House of Representatives.
Well, I don't think he's going to fall into line, Marie. I don't think anyone's foolish enough to think that after 3 years of his being a candidate and being president. But the fact remains that there will be new pressure on him from the House that there just hasn't been for 2 years.
Well, and I think that is the fact that the Democrats are now actually going to do the function of what the U.S. House of Representatives demands, and that is checks and balances. That is a good day for all Americans right now and for our institutions. The challenge, though, is that this president, what he thrives on is chaos. He's going to stress the system, and he's going to push the Democrats as far as they can possibly go. And that we have to make sure that they do it in a way that is smart, that they actually know how to pivot appropriately, because I think one of the challenges is that he knows how to dominate not only the conversation, but also the story.
So, Cal, we're still at 1:37 West Coast time, getting some polls. Polls have closed, but we're still getting some results out of the state of California. What are they looking like?
Yeah, so of the 53 congressional districts out here in California, 34 have gone to Democrats. Those have been won by Democrats. 7 have gone to Republicans. That is your scoreboard as of right now. 12 are still up for grabs. We want to show you very quickly the California 25th. Reed and I were just talking about this. We were framing this, and Reed, jump in here, in a conversation about the future, perhaps, of the Democratic Party. Now, Katie Hill is very young. She's 31 years old. Right. She's a progressive. Maybe she's the future in 10 years, 12 years. But while I have you, Reed, I also want to show you Minnesota. Take a look at Amy Klobuchar. Take a look at what she won by. I know the rules for running for president have gone out the window. Right. Is this potentially a roadmap for Democrats?
It might be. I mean, I think first and foremost, Katie Hill, as you said, very young as far as politics is concerned. I think she's raised $7 million for a United States House seat, which is an incredible amount of money. And I think when it comes to 2020, as we've seen now, we have 727 days, as Willie was so kind to put up for us. There's going to be 20-some Democrats. And if we think about going back to then Senator Obama, who had only been in the Senate 2 years, Donald Trump, who wasn't a professional politician, people are saying, oh, maybe Beto O'Rourke now could run for president. I don't think there are any rules as far as who gets to run for president. Now, there's, the idea of waiting your turn, I think, is probably out the window at this point.
I think, Willie, winning the House for Democrats seemed to have been the requirement going into tonight. California is certainly going to be an indicator of how much they do that by. It's easy to get depressed. This is a country that is split. It is now split within the government as well. But look, in every election, there are takeaways, and maybe the future is here in some ways. Chandrise Davids, from the Kansas 3rd, Deb Haaland from the New Mexico 1st, 2 Western states. These are the 2 first ever Native American women who have been elected to the U.S. Congress. It's something to mark in 2018, in a year in which we saw in another Western state, North Dakota, an effort to suppress the voter of Native Americans. Those 2 women will be entering the House this year, Willie.
And we had our first 2 Muslim women elected to Congress as well, one in Minnesota, one in the state of Michigan. Cal, thanks very much. You're watching MSNBC's live coverage. I did say live. It's 4:40 in the morning of the midterm elections. We've got a lot more ahead. We're coming right back. One of the accomplishments President Trump could tout on the campaign trail was Brett Kavanaugh's confirmation to the Supreme Court. It was just over 1 month ago. We were talking about sexual assault accusations and an FBI investigation in what was the most divisive confirmation hearing in recent memory. Exit polls show 48% of Americans opposed Kavanaugh's nomination, 48%, with 43% supporting it. One of the other big factors this election night was independent voters. By more than a 10-point margin, voters who described themselves as independent reported casting their votes for House Democrats over Republicans. Independent voters made up 3 in 10 voters casting ballots in today's midterm elections. It's a big swing for independents who have not gone nationally for Democrats since 2008, when Barack Obama was elected president. Maria, what's the significance of that independent number there?
Well, what's significant is that many of those had sat it out during the 2016 election. So 1 in 6 voters came out for the very first, who basically sat it out last time, came and represented this time. And you had one out of 10 voters that were brand new voters, basically energized. We saw in this past midterm election levels of participation that we see normally that we attribute to presidential elections. And that means that people want a different change. They want a different direction for the country. And I think this is many times it was a referendum on the president, hands down.
Susan, I mentioned Brett Kavanaugh and the way voters feel about him. It did matter in some places. If you look at the vulnerable Democrats, some of them who voted against Kavanaugh, Donnelly lost, Heitkamp lost, McCaskill lost. Bill Nelson looks like is going to lose. It's not the only reason they lost. The one who voted for Kavanaugh's confirmation, Joe Manchin, won in the state of West Virginia. You think Kavanaugh played big in some of these races?
I think it played big in the way Donald Trump was able to use it at his rallies. He made it play big. I think the issue was probably not foremost on people's minds until Donald Trump kind of ramped it up and reminded them. Again, going into those deep red states. But what's interesting about the independent number and those independents, a lot of them may have supported Donald Trump because they were just trying something new. They said, I can't support Hillary Clinton. Let me try him. And now that they've tried him, they don't want him. And that's why I think they turned, and we'll continue to see them turn on President Trump.
Jonathan Lemire, the White House reporter for the Associated Press, still with us. Jonathan, do you get the sense that Donald Trump now turns the corner toward 2020? We're talking about the issue of immigration. It's a horse he's been on since he descended the escalator and carried him into the White House. Is he thinking now about re-election?
Oh, yes, that's already begun to cross his mind, according to our reporting. And immigration is going to play a big part in this. He told us in an interview we did with him a couple weeks back that he felt like this election was starting to remind him of 2016, in part because of a late focus on immigration. I don't anticipate any modulation of his tone, the sort of the dark rhetoric, the sort of the fear-mongering, if you will, from the president. Expect that to continue. He has told people around him, senior White House aides, those close to the president, that he feels like that's the key, to the success the Republicans did have today. That, yes, according to some people we've talked to, it probably hurt Republicans in keeping some moderate suburban House districts, but this played really well in those Senate red states, those Trump states, where we saw Republican senators keep power, keep their seat tonight, or win new seats. And that's the sort of rhetoric that is going to continue. And he feels like that could be something he plays going to 2020. And he's been peeking ahead a little bit. That, yes, tonight was sort of a mixed bag for Republicans in the Midwest, but 2 states that Trump has already circled as wins for him and Republicans. Ohio, where Republican governor won. Florida, Senate and governor. And let's just say Florida and Ohio would be key to his 2020 hopes.
Absolutely. He's focusing on all those things. I mean, I'll start to use the word humility and then caught myself. But is there anything he may learn or be humbled by, potentially, by what he saw tonight in terms of those suburban districts, in terms of those Midwestern states, some of them like take Wisconsin, where Scott Walker has now lost the governor's mansion, where he would say, well, look, I won Wisconsin by 22,000 votes. I was lucky to get out of there. Those are the states, that's the coalition that took me into the White House, and maybe I'm starting to bleed some of those people who took a chance on me in 16.
No. I mean, certainly, certainly nothing that he has given any sort of indication that that's the part of it. People we've talked to, I talked to senior aides late this afternoon, early this evening, as the results were starting to come in. You know, much was made of a comment Trump made in an interview a few days ago where he said he might want to change his tone, but he just sort of meant in specific circumstances, according to an aide I talked to. Don't expect any sort of broad strokes, no real changes. And let's point out, hours after that interview aired, he was back to his usual self on the rally, attacking Democrats and demonizing his opponents. There's no sense that that's going to change. He feels like he is president because of the way he played to and took care of his base. He still thinks that's the key going forward. I think there will be some measured attempts at bipartisanship, whether it's opioids or criminal justice reform, but largely he's going to use the Democrats as a foil. The White House hopes to rebut these investigations. They know it's a worry. You heard Kellyanne Conway tonight. She told reporters at the White House late this evening that she feels that the Democrats who've come to power, that that's not what they should be focusing on. That's not why voters put them there. So there's certainly going to be some effort to ward that off. But the Trump also will welcome Nancy Pelosi as his new foil, the one he has sort of lacked since the 2016 campaign ended. He had Hillary Clinton. Since then, he's been casting about a little bit, settling on the media mostly as his opponent. And I think this is going to be just deeper and deeper divisions and higher partisan warfare.
It's another foil for the president. If you're just waking up on the East Coast, Democrats have the House, Republicans keeping the Senate. More on what those results mean for Washington when MSNBC's live election coverage continues right after a break. Welcome back to MSNBC's live coverage. John Meacham, live coverage coming up on 5 o'clock in the morning here on the East Coast. There's John Meacham. Just a gratuitous shot of the great historian John Meacham. One of the emerging stories out of the midterm elections is the new group of women heading to Congress, many of whom are flipping House seats from red to blue. In Oklahoma's 5th District, Kendra Horn is projected to defeat incumbent Congressman Steve Russell, flipping a seat that's been Republican since 1975. In Pennsylvania, Chrissy Houlihan claims the state's 6th district, north and west of Philadelphia. This was an open race after Congressman Ryan Costello announced earlier this year he would not seek re-election. And as I mentioned earlier, we will see the first Muslim women heading to Congress in January. Rashida Tlaib, an attorney and daughter of Palestinian immigrants, will represent Michigan's 13th district, while Ilhan Omar, who came to the United States as a Somali refugee, will replace Keith Ellison in Minnesota's 5th district. History also made in Massachusetts tonight, with Ayanna Pressley becoming the state's first black congresswoman. And I want to go across the room now to Adrian. Adrian, just a snapshot of some of the new faces that we'll see in Congress, many of them women, many of them young women coming in to this 116th Congress.
Yeah, Willie, it's so exciting to see this happen. We've got, as you mentioned, over 100 women now who will serve in the House of Representatives, which is making history. You have women like Abigail Spanberger, who defeated Dave Bratt, who, of course, defeated Eric Cantor. So that's a sweet victory for Democrats. I want to give a shout out to my friend Haley Stevens, who flipped Michigan 11 from red to blue. We served on Hillary Clinton's first presidential campaign together. So there's a lot of really big, bright spots out there. And a lot of these women are young, to the point that you just made. They're young millennials. They've got a bright future in Congress. And as we talked about earlier, Democrats are really building the bench that will serve our party well going into the future. And
Marie, we haven't mentioned the name because she didn't have an opponent, but Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez officially tonight became the youngest woman ever to serve in Congress at 29 years old.
Exactly. She's the youngest, but then we also have the very first 2 Native Americans heading to Congress. Right. Texas has the first 2 Latinas heading into Congress. And all of a sudden you have a bench of 900 women basically said that they wanted to throw their hat in the ring in 2016 in Emily's List. After this president was elected, as of 2 weeks ago, 43,000 women have said that they want to run for office. So this is just the beginning of a wave. And we're talking about not just members that are filling members of the House, but you're also seeing state houses. And that is where you actually see a deep change in the Democratic Party.
Well, that's the effect, isn't it, Susan, of young women seeing these faces on TV, seeing them win, seeing them move into Congress. That's been the domain of older men in dark suits typically now. It broadens the playing field.
And if you looked at that judiciary hearing, you see a lot of old white men, and they were Republicans, and we didn't have any Republican women in that hearing. And that's what's really hurting the Republican Party. We need to see much more diversity among the Republican Party. We're not we have no ethnic diversity. We have very few women running. We desperately need to support women. What's also interesting is Republican women tend to identify themselves more as Republican Party voters versus men who think of themselves as Trump Republican voters. So we need people who want to build within the party instead of just kind of stepping on it, like a lot of the Trump supporters do. So that would be a great change to see in the next cycle.
You know, in a sense, Willie, when you look at the results of this evening's elections, or last evening's elections, in the long run, are less important than the demographic changes in both parties. Because we've seen last night, and we're talking about it now, the Republican Party is becoming more rural, more conservative, more isolated, less diverse. The Democratic Party is becoming younger. It's becoming much more diverse. And this election is a snapshot, and we're going to repeat the camera angle 2 years from now. But the party's demographic bases are changing rapidly and in the wrong direction for the Republicans.
And we'll see if Democrats pick a candidate in 2020 to match that energy on the Democratic side. Adrian Elrod, thank you so much for joining us tonight, for being up so early. We appreciate it. We've got another hour of coverage from us when we come back at the top of the hour. That's right, Barney. We got another hour. And then 3 hours of Morning Joe after that. Everybody's coming upstairs.
Tell me that.
Morning Joe live from Studio 8H starting at 6 a.m. East Coast time. But one more hour with us when we come right back. Okay, I think we can officially now say good morning. We haven't had previously to know if it was night or morning or what it is. It's the morning here on the East Coast. It's 5 o'clock. Thank you for staying with MSNBC on this very early morning after the midterm election. 5 a.m. on the East Coast, 2 a.m. for our viewers out west. A mixed bag for Democrats in Congress today. They're sitting on a comfortable majority in the House. That was the big goal of the night, and they did it, exceeding the 23 seats Democrats needed to pick up. The president, though, calling it a tremendous success for Republicans this election night. One reason, the Senate remains in Republican control. Want to get you caught up on some of last night's results as we whip through Kevin Cramer in the state of North Dakota. A Republican pickup there. Heidi Heitkamp, the Democrat, as expected, was lagging in the polls. She goes down in that state. Marsha Blackburn in Tennessee with a comfortable margin over the Democrat Phil Bredesen, the former governor of that state. Marsha Blackburn is the new senator-elect of the state of Tennessee. In Nevada, Dean Heller, the Republican, losing to the Democrat Jackie Rosen, a Democratic pickup there. In the state of Indiana, another incumbent goes down. Joe Donnelly losing to the Republican Mike Braun, new senator. A Cruz high-profile race of the night, defeating Beto O'Rourke. Cruz, of course, the incumbent. A lot of eyes on that race. O'Rourke coming up just short. In the state of Wisconsin, Tammy Baldwin holds on to her seat, the Democrat there, winning easily. And in New Jersey, Bob Menendez winning by a comfortable margin. In the state of New Jersey, despite some of his troubles in that state, he will be back in his seat. Now, too close to call still at this hour at 5 o'clock on the East Coast. Arizona Senate, 12,000 votes separate Martha McSally, the Republican, from Kyrsten Sinema, the Democrat. In Florida, in the Senate race there, still too close to call. Just over 38,000 votes there. Governor Rick Scott, the Republican, with a slim margin over the incumbent Democrat Bill Nelson. We've been keeping a close eye on the state of Montana, where Democrat John Tester is trying to hold on to his seat. He trails, as of right now, the Republican by about 4,000 votes. Back on the House side, a Democratic takeover wasn't completely unexpected. There were a few surprise upsets. Jennifer Wexton in Virginia's House District 10, a lot of eyes on the state of Virginia. And another one, Max Rose winning the House District 11 over in Staten Island and parts of Brooklyn. The Afghanistan veteran winning out there in an upset. In Texas, the House District 32, former NFL player Colin Aldred, the Democrat, unseating Pete Sessions, who'd been there for 11 terms, in a big upset and a changing of the guard in the state of Texas. Let's talk about it all now with Maria Teresa Kumar, president of Voto Latino and an MSNBC contributor. Also joining us now, the Reverend Al Sharpton, host of Politics Nation here on MSNBC, and Zerlina Maxwell, director of progressive programming for Sirius XM Radio and an MSNBC political analyst. John Meacham, the Pulitzer Prize-winning presidential biographer and historian, is also here, and an MSNBC contributor. Jonathan Lemire is the White House reporter for the Associated Press and an MSNBC political analyst. He is in D.C. with us. Let me start with our new arrivals. Rev, what do you make of the night?
Mixed night. I think that when we look at the fact that the Democrats did take the House, it does mean that they can move forward. They have to move in a balanced way. They can't over-jump the runway where it plays into Trump playing the victim. But they must hold him accountable, and they must really show their constituents that taking the House means something. So they have to find the balance. We didn't expect they would take the Senate. Very disappointed in Florida with Gillum losing, and we don't know yet what's happening in Georgia. And, you know, quoting as a minister from the book of Meacham, you have to wonder whether race played a factor there. But I'm very happy that Amendment 4, which restores voting rights for felons, National Action Network and I were very much involved because my brother, Reverend Kenny Glasgow, got me in it. So I'm very happy that passed.
But
so I think there's some
1.4 million people, by the way.
That's 1.4 million that should have never been in that situation. So that's a victory. So there's good and bad tonight. I don't think we ought to embellish it, and I don't think we ought to denigrate it. We need to look at it the way it is so we can build from there.
It seems, Zerlina, both sides are taking credit for a victory tonight.
Yeah.
The Democrats saying we did what we had to do. We got the House. We can push back on the president now for the next 2 years. Republicans saying we grabbed some Senate seats. We didn't think we were going to win necessarily. We still hold the Senate.
Well, one of the things I think that changed last night is who is winning these elections. It's not just, you know, the traditional model of male leadership. What we saw last night was women responding to the election of Donald Trump, responding to what we've been seeing over the course of the last year with Me Too and women coming out and standing together, telling their stories. And so last night we saw women stepping forward to run for office and standing together and winning. And I think that that's where this country is going to go. It's a new model of leadership in this country. And I think that that's a good thing. That's a sign of progress, but it's a marathon, not a sprint. So I agree with Rev. It's a mixed bag, but there's a lot of bright spots to look for in terms of where Democrats are going in the future.
We were also talking, Zerlina, in our last hour. It was women, but also young women.
Yes.
Very young women who've stepped up now and becoming part of the process.
Nobody is going to wait around for permission to run for office anymore. Donald Trump won the presidency, and women everywhere said, oh, I can do that. If he can be president without any qualifications, then I certainly can run for Congress. I can run for the State House. I can run for my local government and then move up the ladder. I think that the pathway to leadership in the Democratic Party is looking very bright because you have a lot of names that we didn't even know a few weeks ago who are now going to enter into our Congress, like Ayanna Pressley and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. That's going to change the way the Democratic caucus operates. You have, you know, unapologetic progressive leaders now as a part of the Democratic coalition.
But you also have Republican women stepping up. I think what was very interesting is women on both sides of the political spectrum have become empowered and want to step in. And I think that when we talk about the year of the woman, I think it is real, but I think it is not just progressives, because a lot of moderate and a lot of conservative women also said, wait a minute, we have to have a standard here, and entered into the political arena and won.
And what a great example, Maria, for young women thinking about running for office, to turn on the television tonight and to see all these faces winning.
Well, and in the era of Me Too, where so many women have had to expose and share their stories, there is the silver lining is that there's also this idea of strength and being able to fight back to the patriarchy, and that there are actually people listening and voters listening saying, we want to change this agenda, we want to change the policies. That's power.
John, let's go big picture from our historian at the end of the table. We know it's been said ad nauseum that the incumbent president obviously struggles in midterm elections. We know that, particularly the first time around. How does this stack up against some of the others we've seen?
As ever with Trump, he defies easy categorization. On one side, you have George W. Bush and John Kennedy, who did well, one after the Cuban Missile Crisis, the other after 9/11. On the other side, you have Truman, Clinton, Obama, who got wiped out. This is more like 1982, where Reagan got slapped on the hands a little bit, well, 2006, which President Bush referred to as a thumping, no G. But
2010 was the shellacking. Make the distinction.
Exactly,
President Obama.
exactly, President Obama did. I think the iconography of power is hugely important here, and I also think that you can win a battle and lose a war. And I wonder, going forward, the Republican Party has to figure out a way to actually address itself to the changing nature of the republic. And this is, can I throw Aristotle at you?
Go do it, man.
Okay. So a republic is only as good as the sum of its parts. And if the party continues to be a white, rural, male party, at some point, there's going to be a diminishing return on that because there are going to be fewer white, rural males. And that doesn't mean that there's a kingdom of heaven progressive moment sitting out there. It's very important to remember, I think, in presidential elections over the last 100 years or so, we've only had 2 occasions where one party has held the White House for longer than 8 years. There's an equilibrium in American politics. Doesn't feel like that right now, but even if this would have been a huge progressive night, it's still not going to be a 55, 60% progressive country. We're very much a 51-49 country. One of the remarkable things about these numbers all night long is how close almost all these races have been. And some people will say, well, that's a sign we're so divided. Well, that's true, but it's also a sign that if you make a compelling case, you have a chance to win politically. And remember, to win politically is not to win forever. To win, that's the reverend's job, to winning forever. The point of politics is to manufacture a consensus to solve a given problem for a certain period of time. And right now, I think what's going to happen, my own guess, is that over the next 24 months, or how many days is it?
727.
Okay. Is that the president will not be about solving problems. But that doesn't mean he's not going to be reelected. And so I was talking to my 14-year-old daughter tonight and trying to make this point about, and this is the way you want to talk to your daughter, is I said, well, this is a tragic enterprise. And so that took a while to unpack, actually. She's used to it. But it is. I mean, Reinhold Niebuhr said that the sad duty of politics is the establishment of justice in a sinful world. And it is kind of a sad duty.
Moral men, immoral society. Reinhold Niebuhr.
But I think part of your point, too, is that the way that the Democrats won tonight did not mean that they actually touched the rural America that they'll need in order to capture the White House because of the way the electoral college is. And so for the next 2 years, they're going to have to figure that out if they want to go to the White House.
All right, stay with us, guys. We've got to do a quick break here. Don't forget, Morning Joe coming up at the top of the hour, live from historic Studio 8H here in Rockefeller Center. But before then, we've got plenty more to go in this hour as MSNBC's live coverage of election night, now election morning after, continues.
With all the top.
Obviously, candidates that have embraced the president, embraced his policies, and that he's gone in and campaigned for and worked hard for. We're seeing that pay off tonight. Marsha Blackburn, Andy Barr, Mike Braun in Indiana. I think Mike Braun is a perfect example of a candidate that, frankly, went through an extremely tough primary and immediately following the president came in, did an event, unified the party, and I think we saw that come through tonight.
White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders speaking this evening outside the White House when the 116th Congress heads to Washington. The Never Trump wing of the Republican Party will look much different than it does now. Senator Bob Corker of Tennessee is retiring, as you know. The outgoing chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee rarely shied away from speaking out against President Trump. There's also Senator Jeff Flake, who repeatedly has railed against the president's temperament and rhetoric. He's retiring as well. But one new potential source of pushback could be Mitt Romney, who the people of Utah are sending to the Senate. Here's Romney during his victory speech earlier this evening, talking about the implications of his win.
Call for greater dignity and respect. I believe it's an affirmation that regardless of one's gender or ethnicity or sexual orientation or race or place of birth, that we are all equal, not only in the eyes of God, but also in the respect and dignity we are due from government and from our fellow Americans. Now, I will be only one of 100 United States senators, but I believe that one person doing the right thing at the right time can have a lasting impact.
That's Mitt Romney earlier this evening. Elise Jordan's back with us. She's an MSNBC political analyst, the co-host of the Words Matter podcast. The rest of the panel still with me as well. So, Elise, are you buying Mitt Romney as the new civility guy in the Senate?
I think Mitt Romney has always been a civility guy, and he doesn't come into this role owing anyone anything. He has already made pretty clear in the past his views on Trump. He flirted around with the Secretary of State position for a bit at the beginning of the administration and got spurned by Donald Trump. It was kind of a cat and mouse and disgusting on Donald Trump's part to toy with him, in my opinion, that way. And we'll see how he's going to respond, if he's going to see this as a political moment when he could step up and lead, or if he's just going to behave like the rest of a lot of spineless Republicans on Capitol Hill.
So, Rev, Mitt Romney, the Senate-elect in Utah, won by 30 points. A lot of the people I mentioned there, Bob Corker, Jeff Flake, and others, they would come out and make speeches, and they would speak out at certain moments in time, but they would vote with Donald Trump and, by and large, went along with his policies.
That's the fear that we come out of tonight, and that is that some of those that were the most pro-Trump, that no matter what he did, defended him, some of them won tonight. So does that mean that you're going to have less people like Flake around that will challenge him? Because by the time he finishes spinning this morning, a lot of them are going to be whipped into line, which is going to make the country even more divided. With the House now with the Democrats, are we into an eternal battle back and forward and not getting anything done like infrastructure and other things? And then when you see the climate of it, I mean, let's not rush past the fact that the Secretary of State of Georgia all of a sudden was the candidate for governor, and he was the referee deciding the match, and he's barely ahead. I mean, if I was advising Stacey Abrams, and I'm not, I'd tell her to be in court 9 o'clock this morning and stop everything, because not only do I think race was involved, I think that we were looking at robbery in clear view in terms of how you manipulate a race this close. And the Secretary of State is the one that's going to have something to do with how we count this. I mean, this is 2018, even in Georgia.
Well, Zerlina, if you listen to Stacey Abrams' speech tonight, she did not have the feel of a person who was going to walk away from this lightly. She's in for the fight, it looks like.
Yes, because she knows the history of Georgia and voter suppression in the South. And I think you cannot look at the results in Georgia. You can't even look at the results in Florida even and not think about the history of this country and the history of race in this country, because that is something that we really weren't talking about last night because we were focused on the numbers and, you know, what seats are flipping from red to blue. But I want us all to reflect back on what happened immediately preceding voting yesterday. And that was white nationalist terrorism in 3 different forms that happened right before this election. That is still very much a factor as we head into this new Congress. What are the people in Congress going to do when the president continues his rhetoric that he will likely take out of last night the lesson that it worked? Because in a lot of these red states, it did work, and they reelected Republicans. And a lot of the candidates that matched Donald Trump's rhetoric won last night. And so he's going to take the message that that was working. And so in a country where we've just had these tragedies, is that where we're headed? Are we just headed in the direction of more divisive rhetoric? Because Donald Trump is definitely not going to pivot and try to be more moderate on those issues.
Well, if the last 2 years are any guide, Republicans aren't going to do anything. They're not going to say anything. They're going to let him carry on the way he's been doing. I'm interested in both of your takes. We'll see what happens with the Stacey Abrams race. Andrew Gillum coming up just short. Beto O'Rourke coming up just short. The 3 sort of rising stars, I think it's fair to say, of the Democratic Party. People had pinned a lot of hopes on all 3 of them. Are you discouraged by their losses or encouraged by how close those 3 races were?
I'm very encouraged by how close they were. I mean, when I look at the fact that, you know, I was in Miami on Sunday marching around Amendment 4 and going to the churches, and Gillum went to a couple of rallies. When I think about 18 years ago, I was marching about hanging chads in Florida. We would not have dreamed someone would have come this close to be governor who was progressive, who was with us on against Stand Your Ground and all. To think that a black woman in Georgia, where Martin Luther King Jr. is buried, where people were beaten for even voting, is, in my opinion, a hair away from proving that she can win this governorship, shows the progress. But almost winning is not enough. If it's within your grasp, grab it. But always remember that it was not even within your reach, less known your grasp, not that long ago. So I have a lot of hope, but hope is not enough. Hope should drive you to victory.
You
We
encouraged
need the
by what you
Voting
saw?
Rights Act. We need a lot more than hope, Brett.
That's
We need
right,
a
yeah.
restoration
That's
of the Voting
exactly
Rights
right.
Act. And I think that the Shelby County decision absolutely played out, and we are watching the results of not having those protections in these states that have historically marginalized black voters. We saw that again last night.
We'll see if Stacey Abrams makes her case tomorrow. These midterm races often characterized as a referendum on the president. The president himself said that. He pushed that idea on the campaign trail. And NBC News exit polling confirms nearly 2/3 of voters say President Trump was a factor in their vote on the House. To break that down, 26% say their vote was to express support for the president. 38% say their vote was a show of opposition against him. And 33% say the president was not a factor at all in their vote. Our exit polling shows a 44% job approval rating for President Trump, with more than half at 54% disapproving. And 47% of those polled say they strongly disapprove of the job President Trump is doing. Jonathan Lemire, that 44% number, a little higher than what we've seen in some other public polling, but about where the president's been, somewhere between 38, 39 in the mid-40s.
Yes, and the president was sort of slow to grasp earlier this year what a referendum this was going to be on him. He has always sort of separated himself from the rest of the party, not necessarily embracing the idea that as president he was therefore leader of the Republican Party. That definitely changed in recent months. White House aides really impressed upon him what would happen if the Democrats were to win one and then perhaps even both houses of Congress. And the president, certainly sort of took on that challenge and had a rather robust travel schedule in recent weeks, particularly here at the end. The focus then, of course, became on the Senate, preserving the Republican majority there. And White House aides telling me not just to ward off that sort of remote chance of impeachment and removal, but more than that, they feel like the Senate was how they could still keep their agenda going. The Senate is key to confirming his judiciary appointments. We're expecting quite a bit of change in the White House staff and his cabinet in the coming days and weeks. And of course, the Senate will be key to confirming their replacements. The Senate also more instrumental in his trade deals going forward. So that became his focus, less on the House. What you're also going to see here is, and it's starting to begin tonight even in these early hours or this morning, a little bit of finger pointing between the White House and Capitol Hill, in particular House Speaker Paul Ryan's office, in terms of who shoulders the blame for losing the House. The White House angry at Ryan, saying his early retirement, signaled to other Republicans that they could also perhaps walk away, that he didn't do enough to save, to prevent other Republicans from retiring, that they were slow to embrace some of Trump's messaging. Meanwhile, we know from our reporting that a couple times in the last 2 weeks, Ryan called the president and someone angrily said that he needed to back off his immigration rhetoric, that he thought that was going to be sort of the death blow to the Republican chances of keeping the House because it could cost them a lot of suburban districts.
Meanwhile, Paul Ryan has his bags packed, ready to go back to Janesville and not have to deal with this anymore. After the break, another check of the midterm results that put the Democrats in power in the House. As Republicans hang on to the Senate, we'll start to see more investigations and hearings against the president. We will discuss that and Morning Joe coming up at the top of the hour live from historic Studio 8H here at Rockefeller Plaza. We're coming right back live on MSNBC. Welcome back to MSNBC's live coverage. It is now 5:30 a.m. Proper morning show at this point here on the East Coast, 2:30 a.m. out west. Democrats, if you're just waking up, have locked up a majority in the House of Representatives. And with that victory comes another major prize, control of the House committees. That means they'll have subpoena power to investigate the President of the United States. Most importantly, a Democrat will head the Intelligence Committee. You'll remember under the Republican Party, that committee closed its investigation into the President and his involvement with Russia. Democrats called it premature, and reopening that likely will be high on their list when they officially take control. That's just one inquiry you can expect. Axios reported this summer Republicans have compiled a spreadsheet that catalogs more than 100 formal requests from House Democrats this Congress, spanning nearly every committee. Topics said to be included on that list are former FBI Director James Comey's firing, President Trump's tax returns, and a hush money payment to porn star Stormy Daniels. John Hellman has joined our conversation, just sat down with us at the end of the table. Good morning, John. Thanks for stopping by.
Hi, stopping by. Hey, this is like the old days.
I know.
This is like the way too early days.
It is.
And we're in the way too early
We're in the
hour.
window.
Yeah. We're in the window. This feels, I feel like there's a wave of nostalgia coming over me.
It is. It's a throwback morning here.
It could be the crystal meth kicking in. I don't know.
All right, John. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us. John's been up all night, if you can't tell. So, John, you've just sat down.
Yeah.
What's your big picture analysis of what happened last night?
Well, I mean, you know, the conventional wisdom was we were going to get a split decision, and unlike 2016, the conventional wisdom actually was affirmed. You know, I think I was out obviously for the last couple months with the circus and spent a lot of time out in a lot of places. Over the last weekend, 72 hours, I hit 8 states in 3 days. And in places where there were interesting races to go and see. And, you know, everything about it just recalls the John Edwards theme from 2004. There are 2 Americas, and there were 2 Americas on display in the contested Senate races and in what was happening in the House, and the geography told the story. You know, that I think is the biggest thing, and the biggest thing about the outcome, you know, a lot of Democrats, I think, this morning will wake up not feeling great, because Democrats, being Democrats, like to invest a lot of hope and emotion into their marquee candidates. And last night, you know, we saw Beto O'Rourke lose, we saw Andrew Gillum lose, and we think probably Stacey Abrams is going to lose, although that's still not been firmly decided. So a lot of Democrats are going to wake up today feeling not great about that, and obviously not great about the fact that Donald Trump ran the kind of campaign he ran, and he has been rewarded in the Senate with a bigger majority. But I think you got to keep reminding them that winning control of the House is a really big deal for part of the reasons that you said, Willie. It's not just investigating Donald Trump; it's investigating every cabinet member. They have this power subpoena. The big message to Republicans in any leadership position in the Trump administration is lawyer up. They're going to all be dealing with stuff over the course of the next 2 years. But they also have now the power to stop Donald Trump's agenda, and they are going to provide, for the first time since the president has been president, he's going to have an effective check on his ability to pass legislation, to run foreign policy, and effective guardrails because of the investigative power around him. So, you know, look, I think Democrats have a lot. We can go through governor's races and other things, but they got to stay focused on that. Winning control of one house of Congress is a really big deal, even though there are obviously some real warning signs and some really difficult challenges they have to navigate now when those 3 candidates that I just mentioned, who embraced a particular model of how to win, all of them look like they've lost, and so that has implications going forward for the party, too.
Rev, you talked a little while ago about Democrats having all this power now, this subpoena power, running these committees, but not overreaching. What did you mean by that? What's the danger for Democrats right now? They have all this pent-up energy for 2 years of having no power. Could they use too much of it at once?
I think that they cannot just focus on just tearing Trump down, which you must focus on because your base wants to see that. But you also have to build up things and be able to show that you in power has produced things. So they've got to be going for infrastructure bills. They've got to go for jobs. They've got to counter the voter rights abuses while they subpoena Trump. I'm not saying do one or the other. I'm saying do both and, because the worst that could happen is you get to 2020 and all you can talk about is how you chase Trump around the block, who's going to have all kinds of moves that is going to keep all of us dizzy.
He loved that, by the way.
That's exactly right. Yeah. Because he's narcissistic. As long as you're talking about him good or bad, he doesn't care as long as he's the subject. You've got to deal with him as the subject and change the subject at the same time and put the priority of people, health care, infrastructure, all of that. They've got to show that they can govern and hold him accountable.
So what's the first thing you jump in on then, Zerlina? Not the Trump side of it, not the side that wants to impeach and all those other things. As a constructive move, what would you do as Democrats first?
I would pass something that protects people with pre-existing conditions. I would do that today. I would announce that we are going to do that right away. I would also say that House Democrats have an opportunity to do something to protect the Mueller investigation, because that's where this is all going to go next. Now that we're past the midterm elections, Bob Mueller has a lot to tell us. The National Security Advisor, the campaign manager, deputy campaign manager, personal attorney, still waiting to be sentenced. So that has not not gone away just because America went to vote yesterday. And so I think that the House Democrats can do a lot to protect that investigation and its integrity to ensure that we find out exactly what happened, because the integrity of our elections, as we're seeing with these close races, is at the heart of our democracy. If we can't trust the results at the end of the night, then, what are we doing here? And so I think today the bottom line is that Donald Trump woke up this morning for the first time in his entire life where there was somebody powerful enough to hold him accountable for his behavior. And that is a big deal. I agree with John. Democrats are going to wake up feeling emotionally let down because, really exciting new candidates like Beto O'Rourke and Andrew Gillum lost last night. But I think they can take stock in the fact that now they have the reins of something that they can use to hold Trump accountable when he overreaches, when he puts children into cages on the border, and push back against policies that are actually hurting people.
And we've already heard some of the new Democratic leadership, what will be the Democratic leadership, like Adam Schiff, who will take over the Intel Committee, saying we are going to protect Bob Mueller and his investigation on my watch. Leanne Caldwell, you cover Capitol Hill. What's the most likely course of action now for a new Democratic House of Representatives, not just, as I said, with the Trump side of it, but with the constructive legislative side of it? What do they want to do?
Sure. So Democrats have two tracks, Willie. Of course, there's the investigation side and there's the legislative side as well. They say they're going to work with President Trump on issues like infrastructure. Trump campaigned on a crumbling infrastructure in this country, so Democrats are saying, okay, step up. We'll work with you on it if you're serious about it. Other things that, as far as the investigations are concerned, those are going to happen simultaneously. So if the president can work with Democrats at the same time while they are investigating him, it's going to be really interesting because a lot of these investigations as well, they're going to really gum up the White House. It's going to take a lot of time and a lot of resources for the White House to respond to the subpoenas that were expected. Democrats have a preliminary list of 64 subpoenas that they want. If the president responds or if they abide by them, we'll have to wait to see. Then it would go into the courts, which takes additional resources as well. And one thing I want to say, Willie, is the lame duck. We're talking about a new Congress here, but we still have the next 2 months of a lame duck, where we're expecting a big fight over the border wall. House Republicans are saying that they want all $25 billion for Trump's border wall, and it could cause a government shutdown. So even before we get to this new Congress, we have big fights ahead, Willie.
Which raises the question why they didn't get the border wall in the 2 years they've had together with full control of the House, the Senate, and the White House. As we go to break, by the way, a couple of other House races of interest. Congressman Chris Collins from Western New York is charged with insider trading, and he's been reelected. And California Congressman Duncan Hunter, indicted this summer for fraud and campaign finance violations. He was reelected as well. Our special election coverage continues right after a break here on MSNBC. And Morning Joe coming up at the top of the hour in just 20 minutes. We'll be right back.
I want to thank this amazing campaign of people, not a dime from a single pack, all people, all the time, in every single part of Texas. All of you showing the country how you do this. I'm so proud of you guys.
That's part of Beto O'Rourke's spirited concession speech last night in Texas. O'Rourke ultimately came up short against Senator Ted Cruz, what was among the most closely watched races of the night. But the loss is likely to fuel even more speculation about a possible presidential run for O'Rourke. Other possible contenders up for re-election last night include Senators Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, and Kirsten Gillibrand, all who won their races easily. Here is some of Senator Warren's victory speech.
Thank you all, but remember, your work isn't done. So much depends on what we do next. Donald Trump and his corrupt friends have spent the last 2 years building walls of anger and division and resentment. Tonight, as the first cracks begin to appear in that wall, let us declare that our fight is not over until we have transformed our government into one that works not just for the rich and the powerful, but works for everyone.
So we've been sitting here since 2 o'clock this morning, 3 hours and 45 minutes. I think we've earned the right to turn the corner, at least, and talk about 2020. We're going to do the thing you're not supposed to do. But we saw, even in the losses that we were talking about, people like Beto O'Rourke and Andrew Gillum is another one. We saw, I think, what a lot of Democrats feel like the future of what their party could be and somebody who could take on Donald Trump.
Well, I'm
not buying Beto?
I'm a little divided on that, just based on, kind of my road tripping over the last couple of weeks across America. I think that there's a real hunger for another alternative. And Democrats are not necessarily sure what they want right now. They're leaning more progressive left. But I do think there's more of an opportunity in the middle. And the most interesting thing that I learned over the past couple of weeks was just how open-minded Trump supporters and Republicans are about a primary challenge to Donald Trump. And at first I thought, we're hearing this because we're in New Hampshire and they can flirt around with options in their professional focus groupers. But no, it continued. New Jersey, Iowa, Minnesota, we heard it everywhere we went, how Republican primary voters were open to something better than Donald Trump, even though they kind of like him, but they thought we still could do better.
John, there are going to be about 150 Democrats running for president in 2020.
That's on the low end.
That's on the low end of the range.
Low end, yeah. Who
are you looking at as you look ahead a couple of years from now?
Well, let's just start with Beto O'Rourke, who there's no doubt that there's a lot of reasons. Losing your first statewide race is not, the best calling card for anything. Winning would have been better for him, although it would have kicked him out of the 2020 race because he said he wouldn't run if he had been elected to the Senate. The reality is that Beto O'Rourke did generate a huge amount of enthusiasm, built a big national brand, and raised an ungodly amount of money. And those are all positive things for someone who might want to run for president. There will be a serious conversation in the O'Rourke household over the coming weeks about whether to do this or not, and there will be a market for him in the Democratic dominating electorate. I'm not saying he would see the front runner or that he would necessarily win, but there's an opening for him to go and run if he wants to do that. There's also what we think of as what has been thought of as the top tier, the five that everyone have kind of placed above the others. You mentioned a couple of them before: Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, and Cory Booker. Those are the ones who've done the most travel, who've done the most in the invisible primary stages of building infrastructure, trying to raising money for other candidates, being out on the road. I don't know that all five of those are in fact going to run. I have some significant doubts about both Vice President Biden and about Bernie Sanders. I think the other three are running and openly running and are going to be out there. It's not too early to talk about it. And I'll remind anybody who thinks it's too early to talk about it that back in 2006, the day after the midterms was the day that Barack Obama walked into David Axelrod's office in Chicago and sat down in a formal way with his team and said, we got to decide right now. I've been out doing all this stuff. We've been working on this to kind of feeling it out for the last year. We got to get going. And he was in the race by January of 2007. By January of 2019, we're going to see a dozen people will be in the race by January, and certainly by the end of when you turn the corner at the beginning of the Q2, some people will wait and not want to get into the first quarter next year because of the fundraising questions. So you'll see people that will get in January, and then you're going to see a bunch of people get in April. And I think it's a big wide field, and in a race that could have all these people, there's a lot of different lanes to get into. The last thing I'll say is this: one thing that happened last night on the Democratic side was something that we did expect, which was a lot of women ran and won, and the power of female votes in the Democratic Party was affirmed and reinforced last night, and so. Again, not a guarantee of any kind, but if you are a powerful woman who's thinking about running for president, you look at what happened last night and say, that's a real lane to get into. So people like Elizabeth Warren, Amy Klobuchar, Kamala Harris, others are going to look up and see what they saw last night as an indication that their inclination to run has been reinforced.
Of that group, Rev and Zerlina, anyone excite you more than others?
Well, I think that clearly Kamala Harris is exciting. I think Elizabeth Warren is exciting. But I think that John is right. When I ran in 2004, by now, you know if you're running. I mean, you could play all you want. because by January, everybody's going to be out there or you're out of it. Every April, we have National Action Network's convention. April of 2007, we had 7 or 8 of them there that was running the next year. So this is no time to play coy. To play coy and hard to get. And I think that that's key. But I think the voters are going to want, after 2 more years of what we're going to see in terms of the divisiveness and the sheer bringing down the brand of the presidency, they're going to want to see an adult, somebody that knows how to run government. So you've got to have the passion and show that you're mature and can be grown up at the same time.
Zerlina, hold that thought. How's this for a tease? Zerlina is going to give us her pick when we come back on the other side of a break. We'll be right back. Our special election coverage continues. And coming up next at the top of the hour, Morning Joe, just 9 minutes away. We'll be right back.